All right. So anyway, I apologize for that. So starting again, this is February 6th, and we are working on our 4th week of class. And as we take a look at our classroom Moodle page, as we will as soon as I get the screen share, just a second here, you'll see that there is a tremendous on this screen on this week. And I wrestled with this. I even took the week down while I tried to sort this differently, and ultimately I decided that this was the best way to go about this material. It looks like a big heavy lift with a lot of videos, a lot of readings, and a very important discussion board. The good news is no real writing assignment this week. So we'll be working on the, well, we've got the annotated bibliography, but that's not going to be due till next Sunday. So a week from this coming Sunday, 2 weeks from yesterday. So here is the deal with what's going on. I've read all of your introductions for your papers, and I have enjoyed them, and I think that they're all extremely valid, and there'll be good topics to write on. But we're going to have to be careful because of the breadth of this class to make sure that all of our topics are viewed through the lens of risk analysis. And in order to do that, I sort of had to broach 3 different things this week. So I'm not really sure what way you will want to put these 3 things together, but I want to assure you that next week there will be very little reading, and there will be a little bit more that we're going to add to this. However, it's mostly going to be a continuation of this week. So we really are doing like 2 weeks of work in 2 weeks, but I put it all in 1 week because it's like we have to do it at the same time, or we have to think about it at the same time and then write about it later on. So what we're going to do as far as our discussion board is we're going to pose a research question, which is not this is not a fully formed research paper that we're going to be writing. It's a type of a research paper, but it could be based on a very personal experience. But we need to pose a research question. And the most important thing at this point in our journey is to conduct a literature review that's based on your research question. So that leads us to this idea. When you have a topic, whatever your topic is, a lot of us did personal events that occurred to us. A lot of people did adventure topics. A couple of people did financial topics, and all of them are very valid. But the deal is that we have to view this in a way that we can take that idea that we started with and filter it down and look at it through a risk analysis lens. So this first part just talks about starting with a broad topic and going down to the research question. So the part of writing this topic, writing your research question, you've already got the topic, and now we need to get a working knowledge of the topic. But as I had said, narrowed down through that preliminary research, or in this case, risk analysis. So if you chose to write something about purchasing, I'm not gonna, I'll use some that some of you know what I'm talking about, because these are like specific to some of your topics, but I'm not going to say whose they are. But if you talked about buying horses, for example, what you really have to do is to decide and to discuss what the risks are associated with buying horses. If you talked about a personal experience that you had, like for example, the paper that I had showed you, the introduction I showed you about my experience as a low-hour private pilot, I really don't want to get into a situation where I'm just writing an expository paper about what it was like for me to get my private pilot's license. I really want to get into the idea of what sort of risks are there associated with the experience that I had, and at what points along the journey that I went through did I make a decision that led me into a path that led me to a different, something that would have been different. And what I mean specifically by that is, as a low-hour pilot, there are certain risks that are associated just because you're inexperienced. And as I wrote that paper, the first thing that occurred to me is when I was asked by the control tower to turn a short base, which means to land quickly. It means some very specific things, but what it meant for me was to land quickly. I did not have to do that because I was the pilot in command of that tiny little airplane, and I could have told the tower, no, I cannot. Or I could have just said, no, not doing it. I mean, negative. And I could have just landed the way that I had intended. Now, if I had done that, probably none of the other things in my pathway would have happened the way that they did. However, I had been told in ground school, and I had been told by my instructor that I was in control of the aircraft, and that if I was asked to do something by the tower that was not comfortable for me, that I didn't have to do it, that I could continue on a pathway and tell them what I was going to do, and that I had control over that. It just never dawned on me. When they came back and asked me to turn a short base, I just sort of went like, oh, gotta turn a short base. And then everything fell into place based on that. So that's what I'm talking about in terms of risk analysis. So if I were going to, and I'll write more about my paper later on, but for you as an example, but if I were to give my paper a name based on risk analysis, it would probably be something like Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events, because I could have aborted that whole thing at a million different junctures, and every time I didn't, it was a decision that I made and it was a risk that I took. So when we get a working knowledge of the topic, the primary way that you're getting a knowledge of the topic is because it's a lived experience for you, or for those of you that wrote about financial concerns, it's something that you know something about already. But we have to lift this out of our personal knowledge and take it into the realm of the academic literature. So one of the things that really occurred to me in the discussion board this week, which was really good, I just enjoyed listening to you guys discuss these topics. But when we were talking about the differences between danger, risk, and opportunity, one of the students in the class commented that basically language fails us. We talk about taking risks when we're really talking about facing danger, or we talk about, well, I don't know, that's a risky business, when it's really not a risk at all. Risk in terms of risk analysis means this particular thing where there's more than one outcome. It might be good or bad, and you make a decision to move forward in one particular way. So after we get that working knowledge of the topic, which you're going to get through this class, through your own personal experience, and then through going through some of the academic literature on your topic, you're going to come up with some working questions. Now, in this inverted pyramid, it talks about this idea of gap spotting. That's really not something that we need to do, because we're talking more about a particular situation that may not be unique. As a matter of fact, if you're doing risk analysis, you kind of hope there's some things out there that are going to be similar to the ones that you've gone through, and you can use that as a guide for your own problem formulation. However, if you were doing a thesis or a dissertation for an academic program, you would look for a gap in literature, meaning you're looking for something unique about your question that has not been answered by other people. So that doesn't really apply to us at this particular level, but we're going to get some working questions. So once again, going back to this idea of if you were going to be buying horses, working questions might be, and I apologize to the classmate because your knowledge of this is much greater than mine, but how much does a horse cost? The kind of horses that I want to buy. How often do they die? How can I maximize the potential for not having my horses die on me? And in that case, how many horses can die maybe, and I can still continue to make money at this endeavor. So the other part of this then is that you're going to pop out with one question that sort of rises above the others. And it's going to be about your topic, and it's going to look at it as a risk that you can evaluate. So that's what we're going to be doing this week. But as you can see in those steps, there's like 10 million things that could go wrong between point A and point B. So for example, if you're writing about something that's very personal to you, it might be very easy to slip into doing another introduction or going deeper into the introduction. But really what we want to do at this point is to start looking at the risk and how we got to the point that we got at. So before I go down to the rest of this material, I just want to point out, I've read all of your introductions. All of them will work for a risk analysis paper, but if you find it too personal and you're not certain, for example, that you're going to be able to get the academic discipline to view this through a lens of risk analysis, and if you really feel like it would be something that you would want to continue writing a personal experience about, or that you felt like there's not enough in your introduction and you want to add pages and pages to it, you may want to consider focusing your topic or changing your topic. And I hope nobody changes, or I'm not saying I hope, I don't think anybody needs to change their topic at all, but it might be a personal decision at this point. But this is really the bingo point. If you decide to change and you don't change now, we're just going to have to kind of, make a silk purse out of a sow's ear, because it's too late in the game after like this week to make that decision. All right, so let's talk about, there's an article here. It talks about how to write a research question. And that research question is what's going to guide everything that, that you have in terms of how you write the rest of your paper. So once again, you want to make sure this is why I had trouble sorting this out into 2 one-week modules instead of 1 2-week modules. Your research question is often grounded in research. That is how it works in an ideal world. However, very often in research, you sort of start with an idea and then you research it to see what that idea looks like. So it's an iterative process. You have an idea, you look at the literature, and then you sort of change your idea to match the literature or to find out what you're looking for in the literature. So it's kind of an iterative process. And like I said, that's why I just cannot find a legitimate way to separate these 2 weeks out. Okay.
We can't see the screen you're sharing on Zoom.
Not see it. Thank you for telling me that. Let's try again, shall we? Let's see. Because that would be helpful. Can you see it now? Yeah, what is a research question?
Much better.
Excellent. Thank you, Shelby. Very good. So it was on my screen. That doesn't help. Yes. So there we go. Anyway, so we want to make sure that, like I said, it's going to be this iterative process. And then we're going to take a look at everything that we do, that we write from this point forward, is going to be based on that research question and this small literature review that I'm going to have you do as well. All right, so the next part, quantitative research questions, have different sorts of answers. Most of you are not going to be dealing with quantitative stuff. Most of it's going to be qualitative. The people who did things with finance and investing and purchasing things could look at it as being a quantitative research question. So there's some information here, but most of you, it's going to be a qualitative. So we are looking at some ideas about discovering, explaining, or exploring. So the easiest thing, in my opinion, would be to explain how something happened, or that would be the tack I would take with my paper. Just for the record, the reference here with Creswell, 2013, Creswell is like a guru of qualitative research. So he's written a book and a couple of books actually that are really important to the field. But there's some paradigms here for how some of the ideas that you might want to think about when you're writing that. And then they gave a little bit of an example. All right, mixed methods, we're not going to really talk about that. Mixed methods is where you do some quantitative and some qualitative, and they tend to take a long time and be more complicated. So I think most of us are going to stick with qualitative. All of us could stick with qualitative. A couple of you could choose quant or qual, but most people are going to be qualitative. So those are some of the ideas about getting into this research question. All right, now having said that, there's some lectures here that I've had recorded, or some other people have done, that I thought were just really fine examples of risk analysis and risk and being able to use risk analysis as a lens for everything that we're doing. But the one thing that I thought was really important in real life risk analysis, when it says risk analysis place, it's really talking about when do you do risk analysis? You do it all the time. You do it at the start, you try to define your parameters. We've already talked about the most important parameter, which is, are we really talking about a risk at all? Because if it's not a risk, we should not do risk analysis, just ask Ford Motor Company, right? Because if it's a danger, you just need to minimize the danger. Oh, and I did want to bring up something with that in just a moment, but you do it in initiation, you do it in the planning phase, you do it during the project execution, you do it continuously, and basically you make sure that you adjust, because the parameters that you chose at first are probably not going to be 100% what's going to get you where you need to be. So you always look at that through the goal of what it is that you're attempting to do. Now tell me, do you see our Moodle page, or have I gotten rid of the Moodle page on this? You don't see the Moodle page probably, right? Okay, I'm gonna do it. Hang on, let's get her done. How's that? Moodle page? Yes, thank you. Okay, so this is enough. So what I was just talking about when you couldn't see it is right up here, this risk analysis, the place of risk analysis. This other important idea, especially for qualitative risk analysis, I think is extraordinarily important, and it's how to frame a risk. So there are 5 qualities that we want to talk about here: the impact of a risk, the probability of a risk, the risk appetite, tolerance, and threshold. Now, the impact just has to refer to how big it is. So if we go back to the idea, if we pretend for a moment, let's talk about horses again. The impact, the level of effect a particular risk will have on a project. If you buy a horse and the horse dies, the impact is probably pretty significant, right? So that's a big impact. But the probability, what are the chances that the horse is going to die? If it's low, the impact might be an acceptable impact based on a low probability. If you have something that has a high impact and a high probability, there better be a heck of a payout at the end of it, because otherwise there's really not a reason to be taking that. Risk appetite and risk tolerance are extraordinarily personal. I don't mean personal like as in something personal that you don't want to share with other people. I mean, it's very individual from one level to the other. Once again, if you are like, if we talk about like something that I think about sometimes right now is putting money into a retirement account. When you're younger, if you're in your 20s or 30s and you start putting money into a retirement account, you can really accept a huge amount of risk if there's a big payout associated with that. As you get older and you're getting closer to retirement age, there's really not the same, you should not have the same appetite or tolerance for risk, because losing everything when you're 31 and starting over again, I mean, financially, is a lot different than losing it when you're 63 and deciding that you have to retire in 2 years. So your tolerance should decrease. And then the risk threshold is just the point at which a particular risk becomes unacceptable. I think that brings up a really important point when we started talking about that difference between a danger and a risk, and specifically, not specifically with the Ford Pinto, but with the auto industry in general. So the automotive industry provides a product, cars and vehicles of all sorts, that are inherently risky. Driving is probably the most risky thing that most of us do. If you don't, you know, I mean, I could use some examples. Some people have risky lives, but you know, some people work in uranium mines, some people skydive, other things like that. But for a typical person, driving is a dangerous thing. But it's also dangerous not to drive. Because if you live in an isolated environment like we do, if you can't get somewhere, if you get ill, for example, and you can't get to a hospital, there's a risk associated with that as well. So there's a threshold at which a particular risk becomes unacceptable. So the Ford Pinto was not talking about that kind of a threshold. The Ford Pinto is talking about gas tanks exploding is dangerous, so we should make sure that we put all of the available effects, all of the available mitigating factors into the Ford Pinto design, so that this is not something that's going to happen to us over and over again. However, it doesn't mean a Ford Pinto's gas tank might explode, therefore nobody should ever drive. That would be that's first of all, it's mistaking a danger, it's mistaking a risk, it's mistaking what's going on, but it's also not looking at the unforeseen consequences of driving a car. So what I'm getting at is the danger associated with the Ford Pinto is not driving in general, or people even dying. It's talking about a gas tank exploding and killing people. That's the only thing that we're talking about in terms of danger. Not suggesting that's the only danger associated with driving, but I'm talking about that's how specific we have to be. Okay, so that's sort of where we're going with that. So then I have a recorded lecture here. It's about 10 minutes long. I recorded this in a place that had some video problems and just some bandwidth problems. So there's a break in the audio at about 3 minutes. However, at about 4 minutes, it comes back and everything is still there. So that topic is just talking about conducting a literature review based on the research question. So we kind of have to do all of that stuff before we have to do the annotated bibliography and literature search before, during, or after the time that we form our research question. We may have a preliminary research question, do a literature search, refine or change our research question. So that's why everything's here. So it looks like a pretty awful week, right? But yeah, so it's all good. So, all right. So anyway, those are some of the things that were going on this week. Now, the next thing I wanted to do was to talk to you a little bit about an annotated bibliography and doing literature search. There is a video that I talk about specifically about using Google Scholar, which is an excellent source. And I talk about some of the advantages and pitfalls. But one thing I did not mention is you can put a filter on Google Research or on Google Scholar so that you only look at full text articles, okay? If you don't do that, or say that you see something, you see an abstract that just looks fantastic and you really want it, but it's only an abstract, you can contact our reference librarian and have her find that article for you in full text form. So they're very, very good at doing that. So if you see something and it's not in full text, it's not like, you know, the world is over and we can't do anything. So, but I did want to bring that up. Now, the next thing, and I understand now I have to click off and come back on again if I want to share the screen, but there's an APA style guide, which is from the Purdue Online Writing Laboratory that will show you how to write something in APA style. And then the other part is I put up for your, I put up so that you guys would be able to use as an example, an annotated bibliography that I had done a while ago. So I wanted to put this up on the screen here and take a look at it and show you some of the elements that I am interested in having you guys do. All right, now this annotated bibliography is not about my paper, my series of unfortunate events. This is actually about K-12 computer science, but it's here for the format. So there's some things there's things I did right, and there's some things I did wrong. But the first thing is, for APA format, you have to have a hanging indent, and an annotated bibliography means that you have the citation, and then you follow it with a description. So you can get the description from the abstract of the paper. However, you cannot just copy the abstract here or change the words. It has to be more summarized than an abstract. An abstract on a tech paper tends to be 150 to 300 words. This should be considerably less. So it just needs to be a concise description of what that paper is. There's the Purdue Online Writing Lab will show you how to do this. But another piece of this is I've written this in APA 6. And now there's APA 7. I really want you guys to do APA 7, which looks almost identical to this, except at the end of the paper, there's what's called a DOI, which is a permanent indicator of where that document exists. So you add that to the end. So to that effect, I'm just going to show you what that looks like. So I'm going to pull this up, and I'll get Google Scholar up, and we'll go from there. So let's see. All right. So I'm going to share this screen, which is just my Google screen. Now, the other thing is, you do not have to use Google Scholar. If you're comfortable using library databases or some other search, that's fine with me. I just find Google Scholar to be very accessible. And I really like the fact that it uses the same sort of queries that Google uses rather than the library database queries. But so, for example, if I were to say, and I think I did this in the thing, but risks associated with low hour private pilots. Okay, so now can you see the references, or do I need to share again? You guys have the references? Okay, thanks. Shelby, I really appreciate that. That's very helpful to me. So thank you for doing that. But so for example, I look at this article and it says age, flying experience, and violation risk in mature commuter and air taxi pilots. I don't really want, I really want to get people who are not in the airline industry. So I really want like non-professionals. Here's something called crash risk in general aviation. And general aviation is another name for people who are not flying commercially. So do you see this article that says crash? All right, very good. You notice that it has some information here, and one of the pieces of information is this DOI, which is that that piece of information that goes at the end of the citation. Now, here you could download the whole file here, or you can cite it, and it'll ask you for some different ideas of how you wanted to do it. But none of them are perfect, is what I want to tell you. But if you look at this, if you look at the citation, all of the information will be here. Then if you take that information and use the Purdue OWL format, you'll be able to cite everything perfectly. Now for your paper, and this is the last piece I'm going to say before I ask for questions, because I've gone a little bit long, but so for your paper, I want you to read and cite at least 5 sources. You can use our textbook if it's applicable textbook. You can use anything that we've used in this class if it's applicable to your situation, but most of it's going to be too general. But I want you to do 5 sources, and I want you to do that short description of 3. So in other words, your bibliography should have 5 citations. Only 3 of them have to have the description underneath it, that abbreviated abstract, essentially. So And that's what we're getting at over the next 2 weeks. It's a lot. There's a lot of stuff. And like I said, I could not find a way that did not lack integrity to put one up and then the other, because they all kind of have to happen at the same time. And I think some of you will approach it one way and some of you will approach it another way. So if you have all this information, please just rest assured that this week, what I really want to do is to start all of this process and be thinking about your topic in terms of that, and to use the discussion board to hone your research question. So what questions do you guys have for me? Oh, I can't hear you.
Hold on. I know that we're going to be doing a lit review as well. Do we need to be doing any work for that while we're working towards the big bibliography?
Okay, so work toward what?
The literature review that's included in the paper as well. Is there something specific we should do while we're working on the bibliography to be prepared for that?
It's an excellent question. So the lit review is going to be based on your annotated bibliography. And so what's going to happen is your annotated bibliography is going to take those citations and put them into a reference page at the end of your document. And then the paragraphs that you develop will actually be what you'll build your literature review on. So once we do the annotated bib, you're going to have those two pieces of the paper. You'll have the reference section 100% done. You'll have the literature review 86% done. So excellent question.
And then also, what kind of a length are we looking towards on this paper?
Right. You know, I really envision it to be 10 to 15 pages, but if it's significantly different than that, it's also fine. I really don't know how we could do a legitimate job in less than about, 8 would be really terse. So I'm going to say 10 is a minimum, and I'd like it to be between 10 and 15, but if it's more than that, that's fine as well.
Is that for just the body or also including things like bibliography and title page?
Oh, just the body, starting at the beginning. Well, so we're gonna write an abstract when we're all done, right? So that would be page 1. So not a cover page or not the title page, but beginning with the abstract to the references. And it's also, I'm assuming that you're not going to have a lot of figures and tables or any figures and tables, but it would be outside of that. So barring figures and tables and the cover page, 10 to 15 would be ideal. Yeah. See, this is great. She's setting the parameters for the paper, so we're all going to benefit from this. Any other questions? You're good? Okay. So what I'd really like you to do then this week is to just have a, crash around on Google Scholar or on the library databases and really just think about your topic in terms of risk analysis. Another one would be, there are a couple of people whose papers sort of fell into this idea of changing your life, which I think is just really fantastic and so apropos for education. Like every one of you is changing your life by doing this degree, but some people wrote specifically about it, and that is a really interesting topic. It would be really interesting to learn some of the risks associated with that. For example, what happens to families when somebody changes their lives? And I don't mean just bad, there could be really good things. For example, if somebody, this doesn't fit as far as I know anybody in this class, but if you have a single parent family or a lower socioeconomic family and a person in the family advances professionally through education, what does that do to future generations? And it's like it's the opposite of generational poverty. It's like generational wealth. It's like giving your child this gift, but there's ways to not quantify that, but there's ways to talk about that, and there's literature that talks about things like that. So just be thinking about your topic in terms of risk, and then really try to hone in on something very specific. Oh, and this is just an FYI. When you hone in on a topic, you're going to feel like this is too specific. I will never be able to write enough about this tiny wee little issue, and you're not correct. And you cannot make, I mean, what always happens with things like this is people want to go broad. They're like, I want to talk about people who change their lives and make their families better forever. And really what you need to talk about is how people in a certain area have changed their lives in a certain way, and this certain change comes about because of it, if you see what I mean. So don't worry, I mean, really don't worry about getting too small. Worry about staying too big. So, because it'll be harder to write.
So based on that, I have a very basic working before I did my research question. And now
Yeah.
I'm questioning if it's good or not specific enough. The basic idea is what factors make a person returning to college more likely to succeed than fail?
Oh my
Is that
gosh.
going to be too specific or not specific enough? I guess is what I'm worried about, not specific enough.
It's not too specific, and it's a really fantastic topic. You may find a factor. So for example, I'm just riffing here because I haven't done the work that you've done, but you may find people who do it for personal enrichment. You may find it for people who have a, you know, like, I guess when I think about that, I think about just like a personal goal. You may have people who do it for very specific socioeconomic reasons. And one of the groups of people I think about like that are, because I teach engineering students, I meet a lot of people who work in an industry who have no degree or maybe a 2-year degree, and they just keep getting passed over. They know that they're the best person for a job, and they know they could manage it, and yet they know they'll never get there without a 4-year degree. So those might be two different groups. You know what I mean? So that, you know, so that's just something that came to my mind right off the bat. But your topic is fantastic, Shelby. It's a really good topic. So. Anyone else? All right, well, you guys are great. And I know I've said this before, but I've enjoyed so much working with you. And I've learned a lot from listening to what you guys have had to say. And especially, I've really, I mean, not especially, but one thing in particular, I've enjoyed reading all of your stuff. The discussion boards have been very robust, and I really appreciate that. And I try to read those all at once. I wait till almost everybody has posted, because I like to fantasize that it's a discussion amongst you, you know, that we're in a room and everybody's having a cup of coffee and having this discussion. And it feels more like that rather than if I read one and then 2 responses, and then next I read 1 and 2 responses and so forth. So, but the material there is fantastic in terms of discourse. So thank you. Keep up the good work. And I might try to post a little bit sooner this week, not like completely, but like if you post something that you think is a good research question, I may comment on it, you know, like lock that in, do that, or make it smaller, or think about this or something like that. So I'll try to do that during the week as well. All right. All right, well, thank you guys. And Matt, thank you for coming tonight. So this is great. So we have a big classroom. I think the owl camera is set up on the side. I should have set it right here, but oh well, you live and learn. Thank you guys for being here, and I'll post this lecture up on our boards. And as always, don't hesitate to get a hold of me if I can help. And specifically, don't forget to Zoom with me or email me or text me, because I'm available through all those different mediums. So, all right, you guys have a great night. We'll talk to you soon.